Okay, so if you've been looking at the standings this year, you see that Chelsea FC is making a surprise place in fourth place this year, above Aston Villa, who I think a lot of people were expecting to end up in the top four. Brighton and Hove Albion and Newcastle United, who are both very strong teams, and Tottenham Hotspur, which always competes for the top four spot. So I think the big question is Chelsea's resurgence legit? And I think so. Let me tell you why. So just to go back a little bit, the past 3 years have been pretty terrible for Chelsea. In 2023, they ended up 12th, which for a team that spent as much as they did and had the amount of talent that they did was not good. Last year, they ended up in sixth place, but the majority of that, if you remember. By the way, sorry, I'm in Paraguay, and this is Brazilian ESPN, so all of this is in Portuguese. But if you look at last year, a lot of them ending up in sixth place happened in April and May, and also in March, right? So, like, if you look at May, they beat AFC Bournemouth, they beat Brighton Hove Albion, they beat Nottingham Forest. That's 9 points that they got right there, plus West Ham United and Tottenham Hotspur. Basically, when they ripped off this amazing May and were able to end up in sixth place. But it seemed like they were still the bad team. They just had a good May, right? So they started out this year in fourth place. And the critique of Chelsea, is a pretty good critique, and I think it's a good critique for most teams except for Chelsea. The critique of Chelsea this year is, look, they haven't really played anybody, right? So, yeah, they started off, they lost to Man City, you can't really blame them for that. They beat Wolverhampton Wanderers, I think are in 20th place right now. Yeah, they beat Wolverhampton 6-2, okay. Tied Crystal Palace, beat Bournemouth, beat West Ham, and beat Brighton Hove Albion, and then tied Nottingham Forest. They haven't really had any real people on the schedule that they beat, and they haven't really had any real definitive victories. For any other team, I would buy that argument, but for Chelsea, I actually think that they've had the opposite problem. So if you look at their calendar last year, like they actually fared extremely well against top teams. So Tottenham Hotspur was a top team. They tied Aston Villa. They got trounced by Arsenal, but they lost to Man City once, but then they tied Man City. They beat Aston Villa. Sorry, for some reason this is loading weirdly. They tied Aston Villa in the English Cup. Basically, here's the 4-4 against Man City. For some reason, I always think that they won that game, but it was a tie. They beat Tottenham Hotspur 4-1. They tied against Arsenal. I think they lost against Liverpool both times. But again, no, they tied against Liverpool. So Chelsea's problem last year was lack of consistency. When they were playing against the good teams and they really showed up, they were able to have good performances. I even think I need to do the numbers on this. I should have done it before the video, but their numbers against the top teams were just as good as like Man City's. If you look at Man City's numbers against the top four teams, they were pretty abysmal. A lot of ties, a couple of disappointing losses, but Man City was able to take care of business against 5 through 20 in a way that Chelsea just wasn't able to do, right? So, let's just look through this, right? They lost against Everton. They lost against Man United. They lost against Wolverhampton Wanderers. Let's go up here. They barely beat Leeds. They lost against Wolverhampton Wanderers. They tied against Brentford. They tied against Burnley. And again, they tied against Sheffield United. So Chelsea just kept on dropping important points against easy opponents because they were incredibly inconsistent. This year, people can make the argument that Chelsea is just beating up on cupcake teams, but we've seen from last year that Chelsea have it in them to go into Man City and tie, to tie against Liverpool, to even beat some of the big teams. They just weren't able to be consistent against 5 through 20, and it seems like they're able to do that this year. So I actually, if I'm gonna make my top 4 predictions right now, I think that Chelsea have a really good shot of ending up in that top 4. Obviously, it's Liverpool, Man City, Arsenal. For the 4th spot, I think it's a 3-way race between Chelsea, Aston